October 24, 1929. The floor of the New York Stock Exchange is screaming, 12 million shares changing hands in a single session, prices free falling by the minute. Upstairs, the men who run the Federal Reserve are staring at the exact decision that, in every other version of this story, they get wrong. This time, they don't. Instead of tightening credit to punish speculation, the Fed floods the system overnight with an emergency credit line large enough to catch every falling bank before it hits the ground. The panic doesn't vanish, but it never becomes a collapse. By the end of the week, prices stabilize. By the end of 1930, unemployment tops out at 6% instead of climbing past 24%. There's no depression, no Dust Bowl migration of 3 million people off failed farms. No decade lost. The industrial base that would have taken 12 years to rebuild never breaks in the first place. So when the war finally comes, America isn't starting from a standing stop. Factories that were already running at full capacity in 1938 convert to war production in weeks instead of years. By the time the first American troops land in North Africa, output is running 2 years ahead of schedule. 30,000 aircraft a year becomes 30,000 a year by 1942, not 1944. Normandy still happens on the same date. But this time the landing force has twice the landing craft reserve and 3 times the replacement pool waiting in England. The hedgerow fighting still costs lives. Nothing erases that terrain. But the breakout at St. Lo comes 6 weeks sooner, because the divisions bleeding into it were never understrength to begin with. In the Pacific, the island campaigns still grind through the same coral and the same fortified caves. But an industrial base that never lost a decade means more carriers, more landing ships, more replacements reaching the front faster. The war ends roughly 11 months earlier than it did. An estimated 180,000 fewer American dead, and a Soviet Union that reaches Berlin with far less of Eastern Europe already in its pocket. That's the fork. A Soviet Union boxed out of half of Poland and all of Czechoslovakia doesn't stop being ambitious. It just starts the Cold War from a weaker opening position, against an America whose economy never had a lost decade to recover from. The Marshall Plan that follows isn't a rescue operation. It's a victory lap, twice the funding, delivered twice as fast, because there's no domestic recession competing for the same dollars. Western Europe rebuilds in 6 years instead of 12. NATO forms around economies that are already growing, not economies still digging out of rubble. Every one of these wins compounds into the next. No depression means an earlier war means fewer casualties means a stronger Europe means a weaker Soviet opening hand means a faster NATO means a Korean War that ends in a stalemate 2 years sooner. With 12,000 fewer American dead, because the divisions sent in 1950 are combat ready instead of hollowed out from budget cuts. Vietnam still happens, the same jungle, the same terrain, the same enemy that never fought a conventional war it could lose on paper. But this time it's a Cold War fought by a Pentagon with a deeper bench and a stronger dollar behind every dollar of aid. And Washington pulls out after 4 years instead of 9. Once the numbers on troop levels and body counts stop justifying the war to a Congress that isn't also managing a currency crisis. 50,000 American names never make it onto that wall. By the 1970s, the dollar isn't just a reserve currency, it's the only serious one. 90% of global trade settles in it. And that's exactly where the constraints that were always going to show up finally do. An economy that dominant can't stay invisible. Allies who depend on American capital for reconstruction start resenting the price of that dependency, tariffs, military basing rights, currency terms set in Washington, not shared. A country that wins every war it fights still can't win the argument that it's fighting too many of them, in too many places, for reasons that look less like defense and more like habit. By the 1980s, a loose coalition of resentful allies and rival economies starts quietly building an alternative. A trade bloc that settles outside the dollar, on purpose, just to prove it can be done. It's slow. It's inefficient. It costs everyone involved more than staying inside the American system would. They build it anyway, because the one constraint that money and factories were never going to solve was resentment. By the 2020s, America is still the single most powerful nation that has ever existed, richer, stronger, and more secure than in any version of this story where the Depression actually happened. But it governs a world where a growing bloc of nations organizes its entire economic policy around the goal of never needing Washington's permission again. No depression. No lost decade. No hesitant Cold War opening hand. Just 11 fewer months of war, 12 fewer years of European rebuilding, and 100 years of a superpower so dominant that the rest of the world eventually stopped trying to catch up and started trying to root around it instead. Does winning every fight actually make a country safer? Or does it just guarantee that the next fight is one everyone else agreed to have without you? Let me know what you think down in the comments. Subscribe. New scenario every 2 days.